there's so much that is so broad in digital. Like you can go down a rabbit hole in so many different directions.
Welcome to another episode of the Paid Search NYC podcast. Today, chatting with Bebe Patel, who has held various roles at paid media, both in-house and agency, specialized and broad, which makes her very well placed to talk about today's subject, which is how to think about and approach the broad versus specialism within a career. So very excited to get into that. Bebe, welcome and thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to just talk about my background with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that feels like a very good starting point. So why don't we start at the beginning? Talk us through kind of where your career began and then take us through the career journey since then.
Yeah. So I'll just start way back when. So I actually graduated with a degree in marketing from Vanguard University. So before that, I did have some digital marketing experience. It wasn't a lot, but it was just like the traditional analog type of marketing. And the first foray into it was actually joining this company that was an automotive agency. So they were my big foray into digital marketing. Prior to that, like as I mentioned, it was just like analog type of marketing positions or even completely different fields that weren't marketing related. And I began with that company as a digital planner. And then I quickly moved my way up into a marketing coordinator. And then I became a social media specialist. And I even had my own team at that point. And then within the same company, I actually moved on to become a paid media specialist. I had a really good relationship with the director at the time, and she encouraged me to try PPC. And so I was able to learn everything from the ground up, search, visual ads, so display and video, all from the ground up, which was really amazing. And I really enjoyed that experience. And then from there, I joined an ed tech company where I became, a paid search specialist. So here I was like hyper focused because we didn't have any visual formats that we had to actually run. It was just search, such demand gen, nothing else. Anything that was visual related was handed off to our social media department. So, it went from being broad to specialized, and that's kind of my journey in digital media so far.
There's a lot there I'd love to go a bit deeper on. I think that the introduction to sort of analog marketing as a starting point is interesting. How easy do you find it to find like the things you learned there and how useful they were in kind of moving forward into your future roles? Is it pretty easy to make those connections of like, well, that gave me a foundation to think about this and that went into these other bits or not?
I think that when you're looking at, and whatever analog covers so much, but like if you're looking at print and you're looking at, guerrilla marketing, or you're looking at like events and things like that, you still have to create some sort of strategy, right? And I think that was the biggest hurdle coming from, 2008, like having a background in marketing. And at that time when I graduated, that was the curriculum. There was no digital marketing that was incorporated within our curriculum at the time. And so it was really hard a few years after trying to break into digital marketing because I didn't have the hands-on experience that everyone wanted within digital marketing. But I had the knowledge, right? I had the analog experience. I had, like all of the creating vendor partnerships or creating collateral and all of that, which, yes, is more of a physical form of marketing, but it still translates because you still are using the same marketing concepts to be able to do digital marketing. So I think that was the reason why an agency like Turnkey, or this automotive marketing agency that I worked for took a chance on me because they saw, okay, she has the education and she has an e-marketing certificate. That's enough because you have concepts, you understand marketing, and now we just have to translate it into a digital format.
And that's kind of what I would assume, that kind of that initial experience would give you almost a better marketing foundation. Because I think this isn't always the case, but in some cases, digital, where we're optimizing algorithms, and it's less about the marketing and more sometimes about optimizing an algorithm and playing to a machine. Not always. So it's interesting how those two things are different there. The other thing I kind of wanted to understand a bit is having it gone through and explain that journey. At what stage do you think, if you could go back, you would change a direction, or you'd accelerate getting to a certain place? Like, would you have gone specialized sooner? Was it good to stay broad for a little bit longer? Like, how do you kind of look back on that?
You're in one industry, and once you learn the industry, then that's second nature, right? And then you just have to really worry about keeping up with the marketing trends, right? And that helps because then you can kind of expand on marketing. So like for them, we did everything from, the initial setup and conversion tracking all the way to managing and then analyzing the data. And that in your work hours is actually easier to do when you don't have to think about like what you're actually like marketing in a sense, because you already know the industry. So I know the brand guidelines. I know what I have to follow, the copy that I am allowed to create, the keywords that I'm allowed to bid on. It's all there. Whereas if you're constantly like in a generalist format, where you're taking on different industries and you're taking on different types of business models, or marketing types, then it's harder because then you have to switch, almost context switch. When I was a generalist, I had to do social and paid. So now I have to not only learn the business, the industry, the platform. So like I had to learn, I hadn't done LinkedIn marketing. So I had to learn how to market on LinkedIn, which is very different than Facebook. And if you're doing Facebook, are you doing lead gen marketing, or are you doing e-commerce marketing because you're doing, marketing for someone who's selling products and not just generating leads? So there's so much that is so broad in digital, like you can go down a rabbit hole in so many different directions, and it can become overwhelming. So I think that specializing in one channel, and or one industry is much better than having to do it all. You learn a lot. It's great, but I also think it waters down your skill set and your knowledge base. But it does give you, like, I think you should spend a little bit of time in it because it will give you a better idea of how to create a full funnel strategy and a cross-channel strategy. So in that sense, that does help so that you have some knowledge when someone else from a different department or a different channel is talking to you about how to optimize SEO or how to do this or that, right? You have a little bit of that knowledge and you know how those channels interplay and work together. But as far as like your everyday work scenario, it's better to be specialized. That's just my opinion though.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And I agree that getting exposure to those different things and being able to speak that language definitely benefits. I think the key thing there is, and you kind of mentioned it, is like who you're speaking to. If you're speaking to someone who is a counterpart on the client side, if you're an agency or whatever it looks like, then if they're broad, then it's easier or better if you kind of have that broad experience as well. But if you're broad and you're speaking to a paid search expert on the client side, then that can get a bit tricky. And that's when you kind of want to make sure you've got that depth of experience. So do you think that's also important? It depends kind of who you're speaking to on the other side.
Yes, of course it does. Just because if the client is wanting you to know it all, like explain everything, then it's nice to be able to have that. But I also feel that if you're in a situation like that, hopefully your team is there so that they can chime in on aspects that you're not well versed in, because you're an expert. Like normally when you're a specialist, it's specialized, right? So you know like your area, and someone else knows their area. That's why sometimes it's a little frustrating when you're looking at jobs and in reality, it's not a specialization. It's actually a generalization that they're looking for. They want somebody to do it all and know it all, which is difficult to keep up within the breadth of like the information that each channel does have and how quickly it moves and progresses. Whereas like, again, if you're in one area, you can continue to progress in that area and become more specialized. And like I said, like you mentioned, it is good to have that breadth of knowledge so that you can kind of explain that to whoever your audience is. But I would hope that if you're taking on a client, that there's other people there that can kind of chime in. Now, if you're like the sole person, yeah, you would probably want to know everything so that you can explain it to them. But, that's when you have to look into like what kind of job are you actually applying for, or what kind of client you're actually applying for, and are you the sole person or are you part of a team?
Yeah, yeah. I guess off the back of that, then, if we think about it in the context of someone who's maybe coming to the industry new or very early on, what would your advice be to try and go broad to begin with, to kind of build that foundational knowledge across lots of different things, try lots of different things, and then go specialized versus the other way around?
Yeah, I think that's a good approach. I will say that when I joined the first agency, that e-marketing certificate that I alluded to earlier, actually was a certificate that kind of went through everything, a little bit of everything. Like we had how to monetize on a blog and affiliate marketing and social media marketing. I think we didn't really dive too much into like PPC, but we did cover some SEO aspects so that you have like a general basic idea of all of those different aspects of marketing. But you're not really specialized at that point, right? Like you just have the knowledge. So I think that is really crucial. Even when I was at my first agency, what was great is even though we were specialized in one channel, we had to build things from scratch. So we had to be in Google Analytics and, build things in Google Tag Manager and look up, Google Search Console, even though that's part of SEO. And then we would build things, but we would also work cross-functionally with the people who were in those platforms a lot more often than we were. But because we had a little bit of hand in having to be in those other platforms, it did help with understanding the knowledge. But like I mentioned before, because we're in one industry, it was easier to be able to work across marketing because your focus isn't like learning about the industry too while I'm trying to learn about all this other stuff. So in that sense, like I say yes, but I think it depends on the scenario. So for someone who's coming new into the industry, yes, have a little bit of knowledge in everything so you can kind of have a basic understanding, but then go specialized. And I say that with like a grain of salt, obviously. When I say specialized, don't do what I did, which was be hyper-specialized, because that makes it really hard later on when you're trying to, move on somewhere else. You want to be able to have, like if you're doing Google Ads, you want to have a breadth of knowledge within Google Ads, but I wouldn't do the whole channel switching between social SEO and all of that. Just have the knowledge in it.
Got it. So one thing you said there, the difference between like specialized and hyper-specialized, I think I interpreted what you said there as like hyper-specialized could be paid search in, say, travel, and that's your hyper-specialization versus a specialization just being paid search. You can work across any vertical, and that being way more advantageous than the hyper.
Yeah, sort of. Like for example, like my personal hyper specialization was search within a particular industry that did lead generation. Right. That was hyper specialized, and I only did search. I didn't do video ads. I didn't do display. I didn't do PMAX. Right. So it's just one type of marketing, one channel, that whole deal. That was hyper specialized. Now with the automotive agency, I was still specialized, but I was doing, automotive or, paid search that had many different ad formats within Google Ads. And I was in other Google related channels or platforms, but I still was only within that area. But I did actually take on with that same agency towards the end of my tenure there, I did take on some non-automotive clients just to be able to mix things up. But it was still easier because I was still under the lead generation for those types of clients. So there's different specialties, right? I guess like they all break down into a different combination. So that's what I would categorize as like hyper specialized versus, like generalist, which is everything under the sun.
Yeah. I wonder if another way to put it is if you could just nail your sort of, or think about what your sort of core competencies, and that's what it looks like today. It's like as much as possible, go to the next ring outwards in terms of the next, the peripheral without diluting the core, and then see how far you can take that without diluting the core, but at the same time you are kind of moving out from it a little bit and then finding that balance. Is that a good way to put it?
Yes, yeah, exactly. And I think you would know, like once you get to that point, you'll know that things are being diluted. You're gonna find it a little bit of more of a struggle to keep up with everything. So once you know like your area of specialty, it's usually typically easy for you to be able to translate those skills and those core ideas across the board, right? You can, as for me, like switching from automotive to ed tech, right? They're both lead gen. I know how to set up the campaigns. I know how to run them. It was transferable, but it was a different industry. It was still search. Quite easy to make that switch. That's kind of how I look at it. I do consider myself like a T person where, broad skills and then specialized. So I think that is a good approach for most people in marketing, considering the fact that it's such a broad area, a broad field. And you have a lot of different aspects, not just digital. You still do have like the physical marketing that's still around too. So I think all of those skills can be transferable. Yes, a lot of it tech wise, if you're going to physical to digital, isn't always transferable, but I think that's a good way of looking at it, the way that you framed it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a complicated world, and it's only getting more complicated in terms of like the different things you can do and to go deep on. And it's becoming more fragmented, I guess, as well, even just within search. Like we're probably going to be in a world where, you're probably going to be running ads on Perplexity or Claude soon. And so you've got to think about how you fit that in. So always changing, which makes it interesting. I guess off the back of that, as another question, how does that change how you would think about what you've just said there around like specialism, based on what we know about the future and what's coming? Does anything change there, or is it kind of the same?
Yeah, no, it does. I was thinking about that earlier too. When we're just talking about all of this, with the current state of how the economy is, I definitely was thinking about, is specialization going to be a thing of the past? A lot of roles right now look like they're being rolled up into one. But at that point, you might want to become a generalist and learn about everything. But I still find it very difficult to say that you can be an expert in all areas. You can definitely still, I would think that you would want to be specialized in one, but then have a little bit more depth of knowledge in some of the other channels that you might encounter or have to manage. But within your own specialty, yes, I think that it's going to change. So it won't be as specialized, or how we've been talking about specialization. It's going to change. It's going to look a little different because of AI. You're going to have to learn how to expand marketing outside. Like Google Ads in itself already has, as I mentioned, all the different video formats, all of the different types of, like, whether you're lead gen or e-commerce. And, so you can go down and be specialized in just e-commerce, within Google Ads. So yes, it's going to change. And I think not just within Google Ads, but outside of it, there's going to be more opportunities to specialize or to be general.
I guess both. Yeah. Yeah. And I was going to say there's no wrong way, but it's a bit more future-proofed. But yeah, it's very interesting. It just reminds me, I'm reading a book right now. I've got it right here, actually. It's called Range by David Epstein, and it's about specialism versus being a generalist. But it's more around the fact that if you do stuff that is completely different, that it's better to then be able to connect the dots like more abstractly. So I guess this does kind of apply within like digital marketing still. But if you do lots of things that are very different, as long as you can kind of understand the core pieces of why certain things in that area work, or the key things you do there, or the key concepts, and you do that for lots of different areas, that you can then kind of start to connect them all in like an abstract way, and that just helps you like look at something and pick out the kind of the core elements of it. I'm probably doing a bit of a bad job explaining, but it's a great book, so I recommend checking it out.
Okay, yeah, I'll check it out. Yeah, I definitely think that's the reason why, if you have like a marketing degree, it kind of helps because it's the core concepts of marketing, right? So if you're strategizing, before you're actually working in platform, but you're strategizing, the concepts of like what you're trying to achieve. Now you just need to be able to translate that into what you're doing. And I think aside from the technical aspect aside, right, a lot of our marketing does have planning and strategy involved in it. And I think that is something that is very unique to like someone who has an educational background versus someone who just got into marketing because they thought it was fun, right? When you go through planning with your team or even with a client, they know business, right? And you're trying to connect the technical concepts with the business mindset that they have. So that bridge of like having that education and being able to explain the strategy because you have those core concepts in a business term, like that helps them, right? And that helps people who are not well versed in the technical aspect of marketing. But then that also helps you align and get your ducks in a row of like, okay, how do I implement this marketing strategy or this marketing plan that we have created? How does that look on the technical side? Now that's when your expertise comes in, aside from like your background knowledge. And I think that's the core that you can build on, whether you're a specialist or a generalist, because you can take that knowledge everywhere with you.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder if the takeaway here is partly from the beginning, there are definitely advantages to starting off broad, getting that wider experience. But I wonder if the takeaway really is after that, it's just kind of follow what you find interesting, and gravitate towards what you enjoy doing. And then once you've kind of found that, just try to like establish that core competence and then just try to expand out of that slowly. And maybe that's the takeaway. Start broad, find what you enjoy, and then slowly expand from there. And maybe that's good advice for people who are coming into the industry. Feels.
No, I totally agree with you. Because even though I started off in social and that's what I gravitated towards, I really enjoyed switching over to paid search. I don't have as much creativity as I did on the social side, with paid, because you're limited with ad text, you're limited with whether or not you can use imagery or not, but I think I just liked the way that I can market. And plus, it was so much easier and cleaner to work in the Google Ads platform than it ever was with any of these other platforms. And the back end is a little clunky, right? But with social, even though it's great and it's fun, there's a million different platforms that you have to learn, which makes it, again, a broad aspect, right? Whereas Google is, here's Google, there's a lot of stuff in here, but it's easier to build on that. And so I think I did that exploration as well. I got a little bit of everything, and this is what I kind of fell on and enjoyed and continued growing in this field. So yeah, I definitely do think if you're beginning out in digital marketing, you're not quite sure which channel you would like to actually do work in, explore it and then figure out what interests you the most and continue building on that. And I think that's a great way of starting out in the industry.
Awesome. That feels like a great place to tie it up. So thank you. Really enjoyed this, Bebe, and good advice. But yeah, great talking to you.
Thank you.